Good evening, everybody. We left off on page 355. They spent the rest of the journey strategizing and discussing past cases involving Smith. They eventually landed on a government airstrip and disembarked by car to a rented condo near the Salty Dog Cafe on Hilton Head Island. Even in autumn, there were still tourists. South Carolina was hot this time of year, and so the agents and Kerry were instructed to change into something inconspicuous and cool while still in the GF-20. Having brought jeans and a t-shirt, anticipating the need to dress like a civilian, Kerry was able to do this easily enough. Before they exited the GF-20, Lyle approached her and tossed a red hat to her. "What's this?" she asked. "You'll need something to keep the satellite off your head," he said, and winked. She looked down at the hat and saw that it had a Detroit hockey logo on it. For just a moment, she considered protesting wearing it. She was a Chicago fan. Then she decided against it, compelled by the anti-satellite argument. They exited the GF-20 and traveled to a rental car place. "Would have been nice to actually come here for vacation," Kerry commented an hour later, while still in the car. "It looks like a beautiful place." The Salty Dog Cafe was seated on the side of a harbor, and so the ships and the ocean were visible from the wooden deck. Happy tourists crowded the place, and when finished eating, went shopping in a small villa next door. The deck of the villa wrapped around the back, and so the ocean was always visible. "A word about maintaining cover," Kirby said, twisting around from the driver's seat. "You are here on vacation, even when we're amongst ourselves, except in the condo, which has been secured for us. When in doubt, maintain your cover. Do you understand?" Kerry nodded once, and they exited the vehicle. "It is a beautiful place," Chris said once out of the car. "I've been here a few times." He nodded toward the restaurant. "Food's great, kids are everywhere, they love it. Every now and then a guy in a salty dog suit comes out and greets them." Kerry chuckled. "I saw a lot of people in bathing suits. Is the water still warm enough for that?" "People will boogie board until mid-November here. I mean, tourism slows down compared to the summer, but it's pretty packed on weekends. And yeah, the water's fine," Chris told her. Once inside the condo, Norman went straight to the kitchen and came out after a moment. "I counted the rations, and they work out to 3 days max." "So our scuba gear is—" Kerry asked Kirby, half expecting to be yelled at for mentioning it. She felt slightly out of her element here. She was an investigator, not a covert operative, and she was starting to wonder what she had gotten herself into. "It should be outside in the shed," Kirby told her. "Lyle will check it, and then we'll go over our strategy." He seemed to detect that Kerry was surprised he had mentioned the mission, and he said, "The condo's secure, remember?" Kerry nodded. They began preparing, using the upstairs bedroom as their command center, until it was time to go to bed. Kerry expected to establish a rapport with her team, but they only wanted to talk about the case. When she had initially taken on this assignment, she thought she would be too distracted by the case to be worried about Connor. Instead, as soon as it was time to go to sleep, she found herself somewhat homesick and worried about her family. They went to bed early and rose at the crack of dawn. Kerry had barely slept at all. She dragged herself off of the couch, got herself dressed, and ate breakfast before they took off for the boat rental place with the scuba gear. Scene change. After a very short drive and an even shorter conversation with the authorities, they were on their boat and off to the ocean. They spoke and acted like they were actually military officers on vacation as the boat sped toward the first location on the GPS survey. Though the previous night had seemed to last an eternity, now Kerry reflected on how the time for preparation was over and hoped she remembered everything they had discussed. Lyle was at the helm, and Kerry was by his side while Kirby and Norman were on deck. "We're moving at 90 knots, Chris told her over the sound of the engine. "This baby can do up to 120 knots, and that'd be illegal." "How are we not being detected by radar?" she asked, her voice significantly raised to be heard. He shot her a warning glance, and then leaned over to say directly into her ear, "It's stealth technology." He adjusted the wheel slightly. Then he leaned over again and said, "It and everything we're using, including the scuba gear, is invisible to most imaging systems." As soon as he had said it, she realized the sheer manpower that went into this operation. The rental-car place, the condo, the boat rental shop, and the boat itself had all been prepared specifically so that they would have the right gear to maintain cover. Kerry nodded and simply said, "This is a pretty nice little boat." "She's a beauty," Chris said, patting the console in front of him. "One of my favorites. The LBI is my absolute fave, though. She does 150 knots and takes a turn like a motorcycle, and comes with 2 fully loaded Y-32s. "What's it used for?" "Military reconnaissance. Too bad, too. I want one," he said with a childlike grin. "Put it on your Christmas list," she said jokingly. They passed the first location, accepting the fact that the wave runner was nowhere in sight. On the second location, though, they spotted it. Kerry came out onto the deck and one hand on a nearby cable connected to the starboard deck. She looked out into the sea and said, "I see it! Chris!" She caught herself, remembering to stay clandestine. "I see something out there. Are the boat's sensors picking anything up?" "Got something on the boat's sensors," Chris shouted back. Everyone but Chris moved to the starboard side of the boat as they neared the wave runner. "We should check it out. I'll swim over to it. Someone get the Coast Guard out here to tow it back," Kirby said. "It's probably the abandoned one they were talking about on the radio. Chris," he turned and faced Lyle, "bring her about and hold position adjacent to the wave runner." Chris gave the thumbs up symbol, and they pulled up next to the little vehicle. Kirby stripped down to his swim trunks and hopped into the water feet first. He swam over to the wave runner and dove down, inspecting it for booby traps or obvious sensors. Chris joined Kerry and Norman on the starboard side of the boat once it was anchored, and they watched for possible trouble. Norman was within an arm's reach of the life preserver. "Take a look at the side," Kerry shouted to Kirby. Kirby swam over to where she was pointing and looked at the footpad. "What am I looking at?" "Dirt marks from a water shoe. See those scrapings along the wave runner's side? Someone, the driver, must have gotten into the water." They nodded. "You think they fell in?" Kirby asked her. "I think we should keep an eye out for a body when we dive," Kerry said, hoping that was the right clandestine answer to give. Then her eyes were drawn to a white mark on the seat. She stared at it, frowning in concentration, and then said, as if it were a revelation, "There's a rip in the seat." She whirled to face Chris. "Analyze that for explosives, right now." Chris ran to the helm and clicked the boat's sensors on. After a moment, he said, "I'm not reading anything. I don't think it's booby-trapped." "I wouldn't be too sure. Scan for traces of rubidium." Chris calibrated the device and announced, "I'm finding a lot of rubidium. But, last I checked, rubidium is highly conductive and volatile. It can even ignite spontaneously in air," Norman said. "So why aren't we gone?" Kirby asked Kerry as he treaded water. "It must be sealed, in an airtight container. If we open the rip in that seat, we might open the container, and then the rubidium triggers an explosion. The fire will ignite the fuel tank, and we'll all go up in a huge puff of smoke. Now whoever said it, is probably expecting whoever finds it to find the rip and open it. This happened in Ireland 17 years ago. "Can you drill a hole through the side and get rid of the thing before it blows us all up?" Lyle asked Norman. "Yes, maybe," Norman said, already heading for the cabin under the deck. When she emerged with a drill, she said, "We'll stick a hole right through the detonation device if there's any in there. It'll disrupt the counting sequence, and then the only thing that could make it detonate would be the rubidium reaction. We'll duct tape the seats shut and have the Coast Guard take it to the bomb squad." Kirby nodded. "Good. Let's wait for them to show up, though." He swam to the side of the boat, and Lyle and Kerry helped him up. "No use blowing us all up in the meantime. Let's take us out a few hundred feet just in case." The Coast Guard arrived and Kirby waved them over. With a megaphone, he shouted, "There may be a bomb in that wave runner. We're reading high levels of rubidium. It's very volatile." "Stay back," the Coast Guard officer on deck ordered. "We'll get it out of the water and disarm it." "We have an explosives ordnance officer on board. We're military officers on leave. Do you require assistance?" "Negative. came the answer almost immediately, as 2 divers went into the water to approach the wave runner and attach straps. "Thank you for calling this in. You can proceed on your vacation." "Thank you," Kirby concluded the conversation, and nodded to Lyle. They eased themselves away from the area at a steady pace of approximately 10 knots. Once they were safely out of range, they dropped the anchor and dressed in their scuba gear. Kerry thought the scuba suit was going to be restricting and impossible to move in, but it turned out that it was quite comfortable. The discomfort came when the oxygen tank was strapped to her back. It weighed a ton, and Kerry couldn't wait to get in the water where it would be much easier to move. Chris spent the next few minutes showing the CSI lieutenant everything she needed to know to safely dive. They went over the basics that Chris had already told her on the plane, and then they went over a few extra pieces of information. "Do you have trouble popping your ears while underwater?" he asked her. "Yeah, I do. Why?" Kerry responded. Chris pulled out 2 earplugs and handed them to her. They were orange with a black sensor in the center. "They're designed to equalize the pressure in your ears regardless of whether you're upside down, on the moon, or meters and meters underwater." "That should take care of it," Kerry said. "Thank you." The 4 of them dove down and spent about 5 minutes giving Kerry the opportunity to get used to moving underwater. 20 minutes later, they approached the MS-119 submersible craft. It was a mini-sub armed with a single small torpedo. Normally used as a survey vehicle, it could comfortably accommodate a maximum of 6 people. Somehow, it was going to uncomfortably fit all 10 of them. As Kerry swam toward the gray cylinder, she marveled at the view of the sun glittering on the surface of the ocean, and the sight of various colorful fish swimming by. She was somewhat taken aback by how dependent they were now on technology. She forced those thoughts from her mind as they approached the lockout trunk entrance. The trunk opened for them, and they swam inside. Chris grabbed Kerry's arm and guided it to a handhold, which she grasped as the trunk door closed and the water began to drain. They had successfully boarded the tiny submarine. Kerry felt the inertia of the vehicle move as they took off to the depths of the Atlantic. She finally popped her oxygen supply out of her mouth and resisted the urge to sink back against the bulkhead of the submarine to support the weight of the oxygen tank. They took off their gear, and then Lyle pressed a button to request that the interior bulkhead door be opened. They gained access to the inside of the sub and were greeted by CIA operative Derry Hanrick. She extended her hand. "You folks are just in time," she said, and shook each of their hands. "Derry Hanrick with the CIA. Welcome aboard. We've already disembarked for the base." "Glad to hear you were able to find it so quickly," Kirby said. "We were able to follow another submersible, actually," Hanrick said, and began walking down the narrow hallway. She stepped through the open bulkhead door and entered a room only slightly larger than the hallway that was crammed with people and computers. "It's an ROV inbound from Cuba, probably carrying tank, and it's leading us right to the base." Kirby stepped forward first and shook everyone's hand. "I'm Agent Kirby, and these are Agents Lyle and Norman and Lieutenant O'Malley with the Chicago Police Force, our expert on Smith." A tall man with blonde hair stepped forward and shook Kirby's hand. "Lieutenant Vaughn, we spoke on video. Good to meet you in person." He nodded to Lyle, Norman, and Kerry, and then turned again to Kirby. He spoke in purposeful, punctuated sentences. "When we're within range of the base, my men and I will disembark. You're to hold your people back until we give you the all clear. Be ready with your gear on. When we tell you to swim out immediately. We'll have someone standing by to guide you in and cover you. My troop will invade the base and neutralize resistance. We understand Smith will be a difficult target to capture. Our objective is to capture her alive. Lieutenant O'Malley may be needed to draw her out. Our sensors are failing to detect the layout of the facility, so we suspect she's devised a method of hiding it. Once she realizes her base is breached, she will likely launch an escape plan and attempt to destroy the base. We will neutralize any resistance and capture Smith. Your mission is to draw her out, and if possible, disable the technology that's blocking our view. Do you have any questions?" Kirby shook his head, and was about to speak, but NSA agent Nada Al-Rahman stated, "I'll need protection while I'm disabling her computer system." "You'll stand by with a fire team until we have a location of her central server area," Vaughn told her. CIA operative Jack Porter spoke next. We need to bring Agent Kirby's team up to speed on what's going on. The SEALs have a troop following us aside from those present here, he explained. They're in their own submersible. The team present here will gain entrance to the base. Henrik and I will split up amongst them for the purpose of collecting intelligence on those behind the construction and facilitation of this base. Kirby nodded. My team will need coverage for the purpose of collecting evidence in a timely manner. Agent Norman will primarily be responsible for detecting and disarming the explosives Smith is likely to have set. Agent Lyle will stand by with the submersible to conduct extraction operations if necessary, and Lieutenant O'Malley is our guide in this situation. Smith has a fixation on her, and hopefully she won't be able to resist the opportunity for an encounter. But as such, O'Malley will need to be covered at all times. Vaughn nodded once and said, We've already prepared for that. Considering our distance from the ocean floor and the trajectory of the ROV, my men and I are going to suit up and wait in the lockout trunk for deployment. We'll be in contact. Just like that, Vaughn and his team of 2 SEALs left the room. Kerry felt like she had walked into the middle of a foreign country and felt relatively useless. She was a pawn in this equation. None of her expertise was actually needed. She had to remind herself why she was doing this in the first place. If she could draw Smith out of hiding and the SEALs were able to capture her, then Smith wouldn't be able to hurt anyone else, especially Kerry's family. It took them 30 minutes to arrive within range of the base. Norman spotted it first. 13 degrees to port, she said, and rose from her chair. Time to suit up. They approached the massive structure. The picture displayed on the viewer did not show an end. The water made everything fuzzy past a certain point. The base was sealed with a series of domes, some transparent and others opaque, connected with walking tubes. We're in stealth mode, but if they look out a window, we're in trouble, Chris said. Why are we so close? Kerry asked. They won't be able to easily see the submersible with their naked eyes. We have a visual cloak as well as a sonar cloak. We need to be this close to make rapid insertion possible. The SEALs have already deployed, Kirby reported, and then nodded toward the door. Let's go, let's get our gear on. They'll give us the all-clear when they've gained access. How many SEALs are infiltrating? Kerry asked, looking at the viewer one last time before exiting into the tiny hallway. Enough SEALs to take the base, Kirby's gruff answer came, and then the lieutenant got the idea that additional questions were not welcome. She still tried to make herself useful. We won't be able to trust our mapping programs once we're inside. They'll give us the general idea, but the place is going to be filled with extra compartments and undetectable hideouts, even after Agent Al-Rahman disables the servers. Kirby nodded. We'll take that into account. When we're finished, there will be a team that comes in and investigates every crevice. For now, let's just apprehend Smith. With that directive in mind, they headed for the lockout trunk, again. Kerry took a deep breath and let it out slowly. This was it. If all goes smoothly, she thought, after Smith is in custody, everything will hopefully go back to normal. We'll read more tomorrow.